Hello everyone, this is PK Entertainment and we are back again, and here now we have another video for you, and this will be a full-on spoiler review of Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania. Now you can check out my non-spoiler review of the movie as well as coverage of other content within Marvel's Phase 4, and I'll leave some links within the description. So this will be much more of a free-flowing discussion about what elements I felt worked and what didn't work quite as well within the movie itself. So this is your final warning now, spoilers ahead for Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania in 3, 2, 1. So the first thing I want to talk about is Cassie Lang, and as a performance, Catherine Newton did fine. There were no issues in terms of her portrayal, but it was much more as a character where Cassie comes off as unlikable in many moments, especially in the opening scenes where we see her in jail being arrested for protesting to support homeless groups. And when Scott bails her out, she's constantly calling him out for not doing anything to help people, talking down on him for his recent celebrity status from the success of his book. And there's a quote later on where she talks about how just because it's not happening to you doesn't mean that it's not happening. And all of this criticism despite the fact that Scott was actually very crucial in helping the Avengers defeat Thanos. And it's this type of personality that is so typical of what we're seeing in Hollywood nowadays and how these younger characters are being portrayed in these mainstream films. These personalities now are so full of overconfidence, arrogance. We see them constantly talking back to their parents, not taking any advice, always rushing in and constantly being reckless, yet they're super competent in everything. And we see this so much recently with the likes of Riri Williams in Wakanda Forever, Princess Leia in the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, and also Ellie from The Last of Us. And this personality just isn't appealing. And where Cassie is concerned, she's ultra skilled now in terms of all of the pimp tech. She can grow in size just like Scott can, and she can even fight capably in certain moments. And even though they do explain that Hank trained her during the time of the blip, because we don't see that passage of training, it doesn't really feel truly earned when she performs all of these feats throughout the film. And unfortunately, the many labels that will surely be aimed at this character in terms of the Mary Sue, that she's part of the MCU, that she's the girl to the key to everything, all of these criticisms actually have some validity when talking about this character. Now, I understand that Marvel wants to push the young Avengers for the next generation or future phases of the universe. So as well as Cassie Lang, we of course have the likes of Kate Bishop from Hawkeye, Yelena Believer from Black Widow, Riri Williams from Black Panther. So I do understand about wanting to push the universe forward with newer characters, but at the same time you still need that substantial transition, not just throwing them in front of us where they're all ready and super elite immediately without any development or progression. Part of what made the original group of Avengers so special is that through all of their movies we saw them all go on some sort of journey, some sort of progression and development arc. So when they achieve their ultimate forms, it feels truly special and truly earned. And that's something that I'm not quite seeing in terms of these younger, newer characters that they're introducing from Phase 4 onwards so far. So the next thing I want to talk about is Michelle Pfeiffer, who I thought was great as Janet Van Dyne, and it was so good to see one of the true iconic actresses from the 1980s still looking spry and energetic and be able to hold her own against the younger cast of actors. And Janet is really the primary character for a lot of the first half of the film. I liked all of the backstory sequences where we learn that Janet helped Kang rebuild his ship when he was exiled to the quantum realm, and later on she learnt of his past evil deeds when she was touching the ship which was connected to Kang's memories, and she ended up destroying the multiversal device to keep him trapped within the realm, and this also trapped her within the realm before she was rescued in Ant-Man and the Wasp. And I think it's always good to show these events when given the large exposition. It lends a certain weight and context to the character, and it certainly added extra thrust to the dynamic between all of the scenes between Janet and Kang, especially in the climatic battle towards the end of the film. The only real issue that I had is that I didn't quite buy the fact that she would never have told anybody of the presence of Kang, especially when we've seen the Avengers recently travel to the quantum realm. You would have thought she would have at least hinted at the potential danger of Kang possibly existing within that universe. But despite all of that, Janet was probably the best character of the film. We'll then talk about the issue of whether there's too many Ant-Man or Ant-People on a team. Now overall, we now have 5 people who are all very competent enough when using the PIM tech, and the problem here is that once you have multiple characters who can do similar things to the main hero, it does take away the special nature of the main lead character himself, diminishing the importance to a certain extent. Now, to be fair, Scott was prominent enough in certain sequences. I did especially like the sequence where Kang sends him to attain the multiversal device and he comes across multiple clones of himself, and we see him having to climb across them and walk around them in order to lift himself over to the device. And this is one of the few times where it was a real good use of the visual effects, as we see him running alongside the crowd of other Scott Langs, and we see certain of them growing up in size before disintegrating. So that was very visually inventive, and it was a shame that we couldn't have had more ingenuity in terms of these sequences throughout the rest of the film. But there were certain times where I did feel that maybe a couple of characters, perhaps maybe Hope or Hank, weren't needed as much in terms of the overall story and possibly could have been left out. Now, it didn't really matter too much given that the film was only around 2 hours, and to be fair, all of the cast are very likeable and it all had a good chemistry and dynamic amongst one another. It wasn't really distracting to have all of the cast involved, but you just feel that not all of them were quite as important as some others were, especially when we went to the end of the film. We then have to talk about one of the worst elements of the film, and that was MODOK, a well-known supervillain from the comics, transformed by numerous self-experimentation. He was always going to be a very tricky character to pull off in live action. I've known him mostly from the animated series of Iron Man from the 90s. And when we look at this version here, when the character has the metallic mask on, much more of the facial aesthetic from the comic books, I think it's a passable interpretation, and had they just kept the character in this form, then it would have been okay. But once it's revealed to be Darren Cross, who was the villain from the first Ant-Man movie, who took on the Yellow Jacket costume, when we see his face, it's so bad, it's so laughably awful, and every time he showed his face on screen, other people within the cinema were just laughing in a very mockingly-like tone, and it just took away any potential menace or danger from the character. And it does make you question how exactly this type of effect got passed through from the editing. And as the film continued, he just became much more of the stupid comic relief. He starts off very much being vengeful against Scott and also Hank, but later on towards the end he switches sides after a somewhat pep talk given by Cassie in her giant form, which wasn't really convincing. And when you look at this type of adaptation, you just ask the question, why was MODOK really put in this movie to begin with in the first place? Surely there were other characters, or perhaps even other series, where the character could have had much more of a useful appearance and role within the story. And even the backstory of Cross getting trapped in the quantum realm and then being revived made absolutely little sense. And you would just wish that Marvel would take these type of characters more seriously when adapting them, either stay true to the source material or just don't do them at all. And I don't think MODOK was really necessary for this overall story. We then have to talk about Kang, and as a performance, I felt Jonathan Majors was very good. There were at times a strong villainous presence within this character. I very much liked the scene where he has Scott and Cassie captive and threatens them. That one moment where he pins Scott against the wall and then he later on threatens to kill Cassie. There was a real genuine tense moment here, and it would have been very promising if this tone had been kept with the character all the way through. But there are problems in terms of the character's motivations. He wants to use the device to gain revenge against the multiple Kangs who banished him. Why would he want to do that? He has a whole impressive army and armada against him. He has complete rule over the quantum realm. He's very much the master of his own kingdom. Why would he want to give all of that up to gain revenge on what we later learn to be multiple versions of his own personality? And also the power scales of the character were inconsistent. At one point, he's taken down hundreds of the resistance group single-handedly. We have that sequence, which is quite exciting, where we see him emerging from his citadel in his full costume, transmitting all of these huge blue energy blasts, taking down everybody, and it did look quite impressive. But then in the climatic battle, he struggles to take down Scott and Cassie and Hope one-on-one. Somehow, Scott is able to trade multiple punches and kicks against him in a physical encounter, and it didn't really make sense. Really, if we think about it, if Kang is meant to be this truly all-conquering villain, this big villain within the Phase 5 of the universe, he should be able to have taken down Scott with one single blow. And in terms of his overall role within the Phase 5 of the multiverse saga, it does take away the threat level of the character. How can he be a serious danger if Ant-Man is able to defeat him? If there are multiple versions of him that can resurface after one is defeated, then what's the point of investing in whatever story or version is presented? It takes away the stakes and the jeopardy, and this is a problem that is presented with the multiverse as a storytelling concept. And I just think it's something that Marvel really needs to think about if it wants Phases 5 and 6 to be very successful in terms of this multiverse saga. So we then go on to the movie's ending and we get that typical large scale big battle as we see the resistant forces taking on Kang's empire before later on being rescued by Hank's huge army of ants who had been in the quantum realm for decades. Again, that whole exposition and explanation made no sense whatsoever. But as we were heading towards the end of this film, you kind of just glossed over it. And I think it was their way just to try and make Hank more integral to the overall battle. But I stated in my non-spoiler review that Marvel really has to think more carefully about how they are concluding these movies, because for all of the spectacle and excitement and visual effects, you just become a bit numbed and a bit exhausted, because none of these moments are allowed to shine or stand out, because we're constantly cross-cutting across each fights and battles, and it's all happening at such a fast pace. You're never given any chance to really soak in all of the excitement or the tension or the spectacle on screen. And this is what I believe is one of the biggest aspects as to what is causing any potential fatigue in terms of these superhero movies. As we head to the overall story, Scott and Kang have an intense fight before Hope strikes him into the multiverse device at the end, supposedly killing him. And then we see Scott walking together back in normal life, as we saw at the beginning of the film, having a nice family birthday dinner with everybody, and everything is all good, having seemingly defeated Kang, or so he thinks. We then go on to the end credit scene, and the first one sees multiple versions of Kang talking about the version within this film that was defeated, and talking about further implications in terms of the multiverse. And once again, it raises the issue of how can they create a substantial threat if there are consistent multiple versions all over the galaxy. Isn't this what the Skrulls are meant to be in terms of an overall threat and a secret invasion story arc? So shouldn't we be adapting this type of narrative with the Skrulls rather than Kang as a character? But there you go, Marvel have already made their decision, and it will be interesting to see how exactly there will be any implications going forward for the Secret Invasion series that is due for release later on this year. Now, in terms of the second end credit scene, we are taken back to the early 1920s in a theatrical show where we see another variant of Kang standing on the stage, and in the crowd we see both Loki, Owen Wilson's character, very shocked to see Kang back in existence. If you remember at the Loki season 1 finale, both Loki and Sylvia came up against a variant of Kang, and it was Sylvia's actions that very much sparked off the opening of the multiverse itself. And that's when Loki came back to the Time Variant Authority and he saw the various statues of Kang. So that's where he was showing a lot of concern. So really, this is much more of a tie-in and a promo for Loki season 2. Now, I wasn't as impressed with the first season, so hopefully this will add a lot more excitement and much more better storylines for that series when it comes about later on this year as well. So that's it, and my overall spoiler review of Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Which elements for you stood out the most? Where did you think the film succeeded and where did you think it failed? What do you think of the recent criticisms in terms of the movie itself and the Rotten Tomatoes score? And as we look forward to the film's overall release, do you think they're justified? Or do you think this is much more about superhero fatigue or any hatred towards Marvel or Disney? Let me know what you think in the comments. And I will provide some commentary when the movie is released worldwide in terms of cinemas, and we take the first look at its overall take-ins and its opening box office weekend. And this will be the first time we'll be able to gauge where exactly Phase 4 can go forward, and if it can supersede Phase 4 and regenerate a lot of the hype that we saw, particularly with Phases 2 and 3. So look out for that content in the future. And if you have any other suggestions regarding any other television series, movies, or any other issues within the entertainment and pop culture that you'd like to see me cover, then let me know in the comments and I will see if I can provide further commentary for you on that subject matter within the future. Please also hit and like those subscription and notification buttons so I can provide you with more high quality content like this in the future. But that's it for now. Take care of yourselves and I will see you very, very soon.